We return on the most important stop of the day with Cole Cusimano. I'm Steven Cusimano, and this is the Money Stop, your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. We're presented by Kickin the Tires and SharpLink Gaming. And I gotta say, Cole, coming out of Richmond, I put the vibes out there. I said we're gonna have a first-time winner this week in terms of a first-time winner this season. That's what we got. Chris Buescher back in victory lane for the third time in his career. I mentioned it, just kind of had that feeling of a week where we'd get a first-time winner. We had a feeling it was just a matter of time for RFK. We were very high on Brad Keselowski entering the week and obviously had a good race, but this was a race that was not highly competitive in terms of the on-track activity, but in the sense that you get a driver who was right on that playoff bubble, into the playoffs, locked in. Big waves coming out of this race as Chris Buescher wins at Richmond. What were your thoughts on how this one played out?
I mean, look, it's Richmond. The on-track stuff was nothing to write home about, but I respect this weekend for what it was. I think beginning with practice and qualifying, team struggled a lot the entire weekend. Ford looked like they were going to have another disastrous week following what was a good stretch and ended up being still a good stretch, but Kevin Harvick was the only driver to qualify top 10. There ended up being 6 drivers finishing top 10 at the end of the race. Chris Buescher obviously won. RFK Racing led the most laps. They won a stage. Both cars finished top 6. And honestly, I mean, the on-track stuff was not great, but I think from a strategic perspective and getting that first-time winner in 2023 and seeing teams like HMS struggle like they had never been to a racetrack before the season was also pretty jarring to see and puzzling, but at the same time, it just goes to show you that these races are essential for the circuit. I think it really makes those teams like RFK and the ones that you don't really think about as those dominant forces, they really shine when they have those chances to flex their strategic muscles. And I think at the end of the day, it wasn't the most entertaining race, but it was fine for what it was, and I'm excited to see how this translates to Michigan because I think we're going to see a very similar product in terms of players and strategy and whatnot, so should be a good one.
And we've seen some of our best racing of the season at 1.5-mile, 2-mile-ish speedways like Michigan, so I'm excited for this one. Before we do turn the page from Richmond, where again they're outside of the fact that Chris Buescher won and there was those immense struggles that you brought up, not a ton else to really linger on here, but looking at the top 10, Chris Buescher the winner, Denny Hamlin runner-up, Kyle Busch third, Joey Logano fourth. Ryan Preece had a very strong day in fifth. He was a guy that was not on our radar, but had a very strong day. Brad Kay sixth, Martin Truex Jr. was seventh, Eric Almirola eighth, Austin Dillon ninth, and Kevin Harvick 10th. So the names you're missing from there are the Hendrick Chevys. And as we get closer to the playoffs, it seems like those other teams have obviously, it goes without saying pretty much, they've caught up to Hendrick Motorsports, but you're starting to really envision a playoff field that might not include half of those Hendrick Chevys, including Chase Elliott, who's 40 points out, and right behind him, I believe Alex Bowman's 42 points out now. So they're going to really have to start turning on the jets as we get closer to the playoffs and might have to try and sell out for wins with specifically those two teams. And as we discuss the 48 of Alex Bowman, this is a perfect segue into our nickel or dime segment. As we go to Michigan, we like to rate the paint schemes every single week. And as we do this, we give out nickels, which are give or take 5s out of 10, and dimes, which are give or take 10 out of 10s. And my nickel is going to go to the 48 of Alex Bowman this week. I love seeing kind of those other sports that cross with one another. And you see a Detroit Pistons paint scheme at Michigan Super Speedway, and it just has a Michigan International Speedway. It has a really cool feel to it. I like the way it kind of brings both brands together because you get the Pistons colors, you get the Allied colors and branding. It's just a really cool crossover. I love when this type of stuff happens. We saw the Chicago White Sox paint scheme that Ty Dillon was racing at Chicago earlier this year. So you see these kind of crossovers. It's really nice to see. And I'm going to give out another dime to the 17 of Chris Buescher, trying to carry along his first win of the season into a strong showing in Michigan. Always a big fan of the Castrol colors. Sometimes it's a white base. This time it's a black base with green and red lines. Chrome 17, just a really sharp look, as always, for the Castrol colors. And then if I'm going to give out a nickel, and there's some other potential dime contenders, but I'll leave the rest to you. I would say if I'm going to give out a nickel, Not a huge fan of the 21 that Harrison Burton's driving. It's got a big wrench on the side. I think it might be a Dex Imaging paint scheme or a Ford Motorcraft. I can't see what's on the hood based on this actual side view of the car, but it's just got a big red wrench, which definitely gets some kind of a point across, but it just looks too plain from the outside of that. So it's just, I don't like plain-looking cars. I know they were going for simplicity there, but it's just not one that looks fun enough for me personally. So there's some pretty good paint schemes rolling out this week, Cole. Those are my nickels and my dimes, but there's a couple other potential contenders that you might have some thoughts on here.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what you just said on all those paint schemes. My one dime's got to go to that 48 of Alex Bowman. Again, I love the blending of the different sports with the Pistons and NASCAR. And the car just looks really sharp. It has that Detroit skyline right behind the Detroit Pistons logo, and in front of that rear wheel, there's the blue, white, and red horizontal lines right along the trim of the car, and there's also like a textured like Pistons logos that go along the white base. It's like a gray texture with those logos. It looks really, really nice. And then I'll give one more dime out to the number 47 of Stenhouse. It's a Minute Rice car, and maybe some points off because it looks like it's 47-minute rice with the way the number is and the logo's placement on the car. But there's a giant rice-based dish on the quarter panel. There's rice spread out along the car right behind the 47, and it's a red base towards the back, a blue base towards the front. Just looks very nice. I like the reds, how the red, white, and blue goes together. Always a great color scheme. And the one nickel I will give out is going to go the 45 of Tyler Reddick. And it's a Rocket League car, which I commend them for jumping into the sport and likely drawing in a lot of eyes with how popular this game is. But I just don't like the paint scheme a whole lot. It's a blue base. There are some orange and yellow lines that kind of burst from the nose and go through the 45, and then there's a soccer looking ball right behind the 45 and in front of the Rocket League logo with a yellow arc, I guess signifying a swoosh, like the ball's being kicked. Just very messy looking car. I don't really like how the orange, yellow, and blue goes with the white in front and the black in the back as well. So that'd be my nickel, and I would say overall it's a pretty weak weekend once again for paint schemes.
Yeah, we got a few really nice looking ones, but there's a big drop off after that, so I tend to agree. If you want to see these and let us know your opinion, take a look at @the_money_stop on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're always going to have updates relating to the money part of this, which is obviously our bets of the week, which we're going to get into now as we take it to the bank. But there's also some fluff content such as the nickel or dime. You can take a look at the paint schemes. Let us know what you think at @the_money_stop. Now, as we officially shift gears into Michigan, looking at our Take It to the Bank segment here, we're going to take it to the bank by looking at the pre-qualifying odds per SharpLink Gaming and BetMGM. And it is going to lead off with Kyle Larson, plus 650 as the favorite to win this race. Co-favorites at second highest odds, Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch. Kevin Harvick at plus 800. Martin Truex Jr. at plus 850 rounds out the top five. So for me, Cole, I'm a little surprised that Kyle Larson is the favorite. I know we had really good discussions about the 5-team entering last week and the week prior, but as you said, just coming off as cold a week as Hendrick had at Richmond, I have a hard time investing a lot of confidence in any of those cars this week. We'll discuss a little bit more about specifically how they might fare at Michigan, how they have in the next-gen car era. I don't think I'm completely staying away from them by any means, but I am, and let me be clear, I'm high on Kyle Larson this week. I just don't know if he should be the favorite to win this race.
I completely agree, and when I saw those odds, I was kind of like really puzzled because you look at guys like Hamlin and Harvick and Truex who have a lot better history at this track, and even this season for that matter. And I think they both, like those three drivers should definitely be ranked ahead of Kyle Larson. I know he's driving for Hendrick Motorsports, but that team has just been so inconsistent the entire season. The results have not been there. The speed's been there for the most part. And then obviously it's like you go to a track like Michigan where the Fords have dominated and Toyota's been just really, really good the past couple months in 2023. I don't really understand it, but I think it's essential to have him on this episode. So we'll hear him mentioned in this favorites category, but I think it's going to be very similar from a DFS perspective in terms of the values. But that said, I think that there is enough of a fine line drawn with the stats from this season and historically at Michigan to where it's not going to be as difficult to craft a lineup with one of these heavy hitters and just in general. So I'm excited to get this thing going.
Yeah, and as we kind of kick it into gear here with this favorites category, I will say at 1.5 2-mile ovals, there's been no better team than Hendrick. So I think that that's definitely part of the reason why you see Kyle Larson as a favorite. And he is at plus 650, one of still my favorites to win the race, despite the fact that it was a really puzzling and off day at Richmond. They finished 19th, which was hard to believe after the string of success that team had like the last 7 or 8 weeks prior. And it just seems like we've had that with Kyle Larson this year. It's been times where it's been hard to read that team. It's kind of been the story of the season. Like they have a random off week after 7 or 8 really good ones. That was basically impossible to predict, honestly. But overall, at Michigan, he's got 3 wins, which all came consecutively, in fact, the last of which was in 2017. So it's been a moment since he's last won here. Does have a 57% top 10 average here, and his 11.4 average finish is the third best of all active drivers at Richmond, or at Michigan, rather. Finished 7th here last year. Kyle Larson's a guy that this was one of the first tracks that he really grew comfortable and accustomed to when he first broke into the Cup Series and really was starting to make a name for himself. Among his first few career wins, Michigan was a place that we would go to, and you would immediately think of Kyle Larson. I feel like the pendulum kind of shifted in a different direction as of recently. However, he's had success here. He knows his way around this track. And at plus 650 and 10,800, I'm cautiously optimistic because it's a high price to pay. We're going to talk about some of the other favorites and maybe how there are pros and cons to Kyle Larson. I think he's a very safe pick this week in terms of the fact that I don't think he's going to sink you. You know, he's not going to finish 19th if all goes well. He's going to definitely be in the top 5, top 10. And if that team unloads like the way the Hendrick Chevys have at our intermediate speedways this year, it's going to be a very good day for Kyle Larson. And that is what I'm basing a lot of my confidence in, is that the 5 team and the 24 team specifically, those two in the Hendrick stable, have been extremely strong at 1.5 to 2 mile tracks this year. Jumping over to one of the hottest drivers in the sport in a short-term basis, Denny Hamlin, of course, coming off the win at Pocono, finished runner-up last week. He's got a 3-race top 7 streak, so it's hard to find a hotter driver in the garage than Denny Hamlin. Finished 3rd with 38 laps led at Michigan last year, which was tied for the most, and he also had a stage win and a runner-up in another stage last year, average running position of 5th in that Michigan race. So you think about Michigan races in the next-gen car, and I guess specifically the most recent one, Denny Hamlin was one of the most successful drivers at this track the last time we were here. Overall, he's got a pair of wins at Michigan, the most recent of which, though, has not come since 2011. 53% top 10 rate, 12.6 average finish, and 262 laps led. He's also led laps in general in our last 7 consecutive races, which is what I'm basing a lot of my confidence in here. He also has a 5-race top 6 streak with a pair of runner-ups at Michigan. So he's had very consistent success here, plus 700 for the win, 10,700 in daily fantasy. I think considering how hot Denny Hamlin is, I like his value better than Kyle Larson's out of our 2 favorites that we've discussed so far. But again, I'm thinking of drivers and teams that are really hot entering this week. I know Kyle Larson has the overall really good resume at Michigan, and so does Denny Hamlin to some degree, but I'm more confident in Denny only because the last several weeks he's just looked so good. That 11 team has been really tough to top at any track we've gone to, whether it was Richmond last week, Pocono the week prior, and I think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with again this week.
Couldn't agree more. I think between those 2 drivers, he's the better value, albeit it's only $100 less for DFS. But you look at what this team's done this last month and a half, what they've done at Michigan, the last 5 races plus. I think there's no better driver that you're looking at right now than Denny Hamlin in general. I guess, obviously, the next best in line would be Martin Truex Jr., in my opinion. Coming off his third straight top 10 after Richmond, he's also led laps in his last 4 races, which includes 6 of the last 7 in 2023. And keep in mind, he's also seeking that regular season championship and the points bonus that comes along with it. So, he's looking to keep that consistency rolling and the high success rate. In this race last year, he finished 6th at Michigan. He's also riding a 6-race top 10 streak there, which is the longest active. So you consider what both Denny and Truex have done at Michigan the last 5-6 races. They're probably the 2 best options that we've mentioned so far. Overall at Michigan, though, he does not have a win. Top 10's nearly half his starts and a 13.5 average with only 1 DNF. His values are plus 850 and 10,500 for DFS. If we're picking between the 2 Joe Gibbs Toyotas, I gotta go Denny over Truex this week. But who I'm gonna call the best value in this favorites tier, it's gotta be Kevin Harvick, and his numbers are just insane. So in 2023, first off, he's riding a 3-race top 10 streak as well, like Hamlin and Truex. So I think he's in that same breath, even though he does not have a win this year. He did win this race last year at Michigan. And keep in mind, this is a driver that has won 4 of the last 5 Michigan races. He's also won 5 of the last 7 there. So just to put it simply, he is like the best at Michigan. Overall, 6 wins. He has an 11th place average, which is second best, and that says a lot considering how long he's been in the sport for. Also, only 1 DNF, which is really, really encouraging, and again, says a lot for how long he's been around. 7 runner-ups, so you combine those numbers. He has 13 top 2 finishes with 6 wins included at Michigan in his career, which is just completely absurd. Over 700 laps led, which is the most right now, and he has laps led in 7 of his last 8 races at Michigan. And I'm taking a lot of stock into that stat specifically because, yes, he's been around the longest, but you look at the drivers who've led the most laps here, and that blows pretty much everybody out of the water. So he has the recent success. He has the overall success. He's been really good as of late in 2023, and the Fords specifically have been trending in a really, really great direction. I love Kevin Harvick. I love his values. Plus 800 for the race win and 10,300 for DFS, which is steep, definitely, for Kevin Harvick this season, but you consider what all I've just said about his stats at Michigan, it makes complete sense, and I think he's going to be your best value in this the favorites tier.
That is remarkable to see those numbers and the fact that he is the 4th most favored driver, and I guess it's only because he hasn't won this year, but it's hard to find any driver that has better numbers than that at any track, but I'm going to do my best and try to find somebody that has at least similar numbers at Michigan as we move into the sleepers category. Those are pretty good favorites. You've got Denny and Truex out of the Gibbs stable, along with Kyle Larson and Kevin Harvick. So pick your poison. I think we both agree that Denny is a very safe bet. Harvick is as good of a bet as you're going to get, though, in terms of the value, with as much success overall in his career and recently as he has had at Michigan. Looking at sleepers, though, another guy that's had really good success both recently and at Michigan that really seems like he is knocking on the door of another win is Joey Logano. Coming off the top 5 at Richmond, finished 4th. He has 2 top 5s in the last 3 races, and Logano at Michigan, overall 3 wins, the most recent of which came in 2019, the pre-Next Gen era. However, he has nearly 78% top 10 rate, 69% at Michigan, 12.2 average finish, nearly 600 laps led here as well. Finished 4th there last year in the Next Gen car. So Joey Logano, a guy that has been peaking at the right time. He's been a guy, we've discussed this the last 3 years on this podcast, or however long it's been, that it's a team and a driver that know when to turn it on. And it's this time of year, when we turn the calendar to August, and it feels like things have been trending in that direction for the 22 team. And I think no one's talking about him now, but in 4 weeks, he's going to have at least one more win under his belt entering the playoffs. And I fully expect that it could be this week at Michigan, considering how he's been turning it up recently, and that 22 team as a whole has been turning it up, along with the fact that he's had good success over his career at Michigan. So I think that look no further than Joey Logano as a good sleeper for the win. He is my first sleeper for the win, but I also want to name another Hendrick Chevy. Again, I'm not completely out on the Hendrick Chevys, despite the fact we were at Richmond. It's important to note that this is a completely different package than we were racing at Richmond. In this package that we've run at places like Michigan this year, Hendrick has been the most dominant team by far and away. It's mostly been Kyle Larson and William Byron, but I talk about Chase Elliott. It's a guy that needs a win. I mentioned it near the top of the show. 40 points out. It's certainly not completely out of the realm of possibility he could race his way in on points, but that's not what he's trying to do. This team wants a win, regardless of if the playoffs are on the line or not. Chase Elliott wants to be back in victory lane. He's averaging a 12th place finish over the last 4 weeks. He's finished 13th or better in all 4 races. That's not going to be good enough to get you into the playoffs on points when you consider he's 40 points out with those 4 races to go. Thinking about Michigan, though, specifically for Chase Elliott, best average finish of 8th among drivers with 10 or more starts, so he has been rock solid consistent here at this track. An 83% top 10 rate. That's 83% out of the 10-plus starts he has, including 3 runner-up finishes. Finished 11th there last year. I just think there's going to be urgency setting in. They're not pressing the panic button, but there's certainly going to be urgency. And if there's a position where Chase Elliott is in the top 5, top 3, and there's a call to be made late in this race, then you're going to see the panic button pushed. I think you're going to start to see there's some very hungry drivers overall in the field that want to make the playoffs. But how about a former champion in Chase Elliott? He's got the success at this track in his past. Very solid, always a top 10 car here. And has been okay the last 4 weeks, but he's going to have to be better. And I think that Chase Elliott, considering the urgency and considering how good Hendrick has been on the intermediate speedways this year, I think Chase Elliott could be a very good pick for the win this week as a sleeper, potentially.
Yeah, definitely. Chase is one that I was going to be very apprehensive to put on our outline going into these last few races outside of, like, Watkins Glen, just because, like, it's not a must-win scenario, but it pretty much is, and you just don't know if that's going to turn into desperation, if they're going to gamble and just go for the win and not go for the dominance. But I think you look at his stats from Michigan, and they're too good to ignore. That on top of the fact that this is going to definitely be a fuel mileage race, and Alan Gustafson and Chase Elliott have done some really, really good things when the races have come down to that. And then Joey Logano, obviously, he's looked really good this past month or so. I think the stats at Michigan speak for themselves. Again, going with what I mentioned about Kevin Harvick in the laps led, he's right behind him at 600 and probably half as many starts as Kevin Harvick. So that also speaks volumes. I think also we've been killing it this entire season with our sleepers and the values. I love all 4 drivers mentioned that we're going to mention in this sleepers category. I love all their values. And you mentioned the 2 former champions. I'm going to mention one more. That'll be obviously Brad Keselowski. I alluded to it earlier in the show. RFK with a flat-out dominant day at Richmond last week. Combined for most laps led. They got the win. They got a stage win. Both cars placed top 6. And BK, he is still winless at his home track of Michigan. And I got to think, obviously, as a co-owner, you're happy for your driver. But now Chris Buescher has 2 wins under his belt since BK took over. Brad has nothing. And I got to think, after their performance last week, he's got to be just more motivated than ever to finally notch one under his belt at his home track. Documented Ford's upswing as a whole over the past month or so. And I think what we're seeing right now is Brad's most competitive stretch of his career in the last probably 2 years. And this just seems like a recipe for success. Coupling this with RFK's recent upswing and Ford's upswing, I like Brad a lot. I think overall at Michigan, there's not a lot to show. Only a 52% top 10 rate, 12.6 average, but only 1 DNF. So he's been a rock-solid driver there. 3 runner-ups in total, and he finished 15th last year when that team was not at their best. His value for the race wins plus 2,000, and his value for DFS is pretty much what it's been all season at $8,600. Like both those values a lot. And then I'm going to go with one more Penske Ford. That'll be Ryan Blaney, who finished 14th at Richmond, and it's just been tough, man, to pick him for DFS because the speed's been there, but the results definitely have not been. Case in point, he's led laps in 3 of the last 4 races, and only there's 1 top 10 to show for that. So just proceed with caution with Ryan Blaney, but I think You think of Michigan, that's always a place where that team tends to excel. And the Fords in general have just been so good at this 2-mile track. He's got one win here, which came back in 2021. He has a 50% top 10 rate and a 14.5 average. So, again, erring on that consistent side, but just not as much dominance as you'd like to have for like a DFS driver. He finished 5th last year at Michigan. He's also riding back-to-back top 5s there. Additionally, he's finished top 5 in 3 of the last 4 races there, and he's led laps in 6 of the last 8 races at Michigan. So Ryan Blaney has always been a very solid driver at Michigan. Really solid values at $9,700 and plus $900 for the race win. I think I would tend to obviously lean towards Joey Logano in this tier, and then even Chase Elliott in the Hendrick equipment over Keselowski and Blaney. But if there's a way you can fit, like a Chase Elliott and Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, I think that's kind of the way that you'd want to construct your DFS lineup.
You hit it right on the head in saying, as an overarching theme, that the Fords are the stable I am most confident in this week. It just seems like every time we come to Michigan, they shift it to another gear. They take it to another level. And I'm a big fan of all 4 of those drivers, Brad, Blaney, Chase, and Logano. I think any 4 of them as sleepers could go out there and win the race. And they're all kind of, I wouldn't say all of them, but a good amount of them in terms of the Fords in that stable. They're kind of peaking at a good time right now, and you've got the urgency element there with Chase Elliott. But as I talk about my confidence in the Fords, some of those there are good value. Like Brad Keselowski at 8,600 and plus 2,000 for the win. Very good value. But as we move to our value picks, I'm looking at Michael McDowell, a guy that's going to be lower valued this week because of the low finish at Richmond. But Michael McDowell and that 34 team have been one of the top teams in the garage in terms of consistency over the summer months of basically June and July. We get into August, and they're going to want to keep steamrolling on the way towards the playoffs. It would be pretty cool to see McDowell in the playoffs again, this time, whether it be on points or not, after he made it based on the win last year. I'm sure there was a lot of people out there that thought it was kind of a fluky way to get in, winning the 500 in 2022. This year, they have been one of the top teams over the summer months. Finished 22nd at Richmond, and it was due to strategy. Still a top 15 car for a majority of the day, not for lack of speed, but the strategy is what wound up sinking him at Richmond. But then you think about Michigan. Finished 28th there last year, a career best 20th the year prior in 2021, but he was involved in an accident on lap 25 last year. So I think that there's going to be a lot of eyes that are not on Michael McDowell, but as a value, I'm just looking for somebody you can plug into your lineup and feel pretty good about, especially as a Ford. 6,200 in daily fantasy is about as good a value as you're going to find. So you're looking for low-priced drivers that are going to fill out your lineup. Michael McDowell is an excellent value for you in this tier of drivers, considering how good he's been this year. I mean, he's put up some amazing numbers, with the exception of Richmond, over the past several weeks and months, and I feel really good about that team this week, despite the fact that he didn't have the best success there last year. I'm banking on the fact that this is a new team and a new driver this year that has really rounded into form over the summer months. Another guy that's been a big surprise this year in terms of his consistency is Ty Gibbs, a very good value this week. He's led laps in every start at Michigan in his career, including Cup, Xfinity, and ARCA. He's got one win in the Xfinity Series and the ARCA Series at Michigan. So you think about the fact that Ty Gibbs this year has overexceeded expectations at every track we've gone to this year, whether they've been good to him or not in his developmental career leading up to his Cup Series tenure. I think you think about one of his better tracks to begin with at those lower levels where he's got the wins in Xfinity and ARCA. Look no further than Ty Gibbs as a guy that could go out there and potentially contend for a top 5 or a win if all goes right. Again, in one of his first Cup starts last year, finished 10th there, no finish worse than 13th at this track, which was in his first Xfinity Series start. I'm just thinking of a track that has always been good to Ty Gibbs. The fact that here in his rookie season, he has just excelled everywhere we've gone. I feel really good about that car and that stable. Again, we haven't talked a ton about Joe Gibbs Racing this episode with the exception of Denny and Truex, but Ty Gibbs has done a masterful job considering the shoes he's in right now. As such a young kid, to be doing what he's doing has been so impressive. 8,100 in daily fantasy is a very solid value, which is just below the median or average salary in your budget. I think Ty Gibbs is definitely a guy you can fit into your lineups, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can put forth this week.
Yeah, so you got two drivers, one on the high end in Ty Gibbs and one on the low end in Michael McDowell, both who I think are going to be great picks and great values for DFS. I'm going to go right in the middle right about and pick Eric Jones, who's been really, really consistent over the last month, I would say. A couple 11th place finishes, some top 10s wedged in there. Just been really, 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 really good for that Legacy MC stable. And then you look at Michigan, a home race for him. Finished 8th last year with laps led and finished top 10 in both stages. Also had an average running position of 8th in this race, so he was just up front the entire day at a time where the team wasn't really at its best, so I'm taking quite a bit of stock into that performance in 2022 at Michigan. Overall, only 2 top 10s here, and seeing as one of those came last year, I think that's definitely something to take into consideration. The other top 10 was 3rd place finish in 2017. He has an average finish of 15.7, so very, very consistent. I think if you look at Eric Jones and he qualifies anywhere in the 20s, that would be a really good driver to plug into your lineups. His value is also really, really solid at $7,300. And then looking at someone on the very low end of things as a value pick, I'm looking at Corey LaJoie, who's had a really, really rock-solid season. Also just inked a multi-year extension with Spire Motorsports, so I gotta think there's gotta be some good mojo surrounding that team, a good buzz in the air going into this next weekend in Michigan. But coming off a career best 19th place finish at Michigan last year, which marked 4 straight starts of finishing 22nd or better for him at that 2-mile track. Also, keep in mind, he has 11 top 20s this year, and that's going to be half his starts in 2023 compared to last year where he only had 15 in total. So that team is looking like it took its next step up, evidently, compared to 2022. And I think you look at Michigan, team finished top 20 last year. They already have 11 of those, 11 of those and half the starts this year. I think Corey LaJoie is a really good, and I would even go as far as saying a safe top 20 pick for DFS. So I love his value at $5,500. And I think, again, you look at this episode, our sleepers and our values are going to be the ones that win you a lot of money in your DFS lineups.
Yeah, there's some really good ways to round out your lineup with those drivers we just named, because there's just some that are really cheap there in terms of Eric Jones, Corey LaJoie, and Michael McDowell, along with some of the sleepers, like Brad Keselowski, I think is a really good value this week, although he was in our sleepers category. So those were our value picks: McDowell, Gibbs, Jones, and LaJoie. That is 12 drivers, 4 from each tier now, values, sleepers, and favorites. We're each going to pick one from the tier to get this down to 6, kind of instilling where most of our confidence is. I mentioned, Cole, I'm really big on the Toyotas and the Fords this week. So out of the favorites category, I got to go with Denny Hamlin. Out of the sleepers, I'm going to take Joey Logano, team that's really peaking at the right time, and Ty Gibbs going to one of his bread and butter tracks. I just love that for a value pick this week.
I like all those drivers. For me, it's pretty easy for my favorite. I'm going to go with Kevin Harvick once again this week. Those stats are just completely ridiculous. I'd be stupid not to pick him. I'm going to go with another Blue Oval for my sleeper. That'll be Brad Keselowski coming off a really strong day in Richmond for RFK and going into his home track. And then I'll go with another hometown guy and Eric Jones as my sleeper. I think that team's just been really, really good over the past month. And obviously going into a home track where you had success recently, it's going to bode well for that old Jones boy.
Indeed. We just talked about some of our favorite values in terms of daily fantasy. We'll get into our DFS lineup in a moment. But in terms of big money bets, we're going to talk prop bets here, because everyone kind of gets tied up in the fact that in order to bet on NASCAR, it's a two-way street. You're either going to have a daily fantasy lineup or you're going to pick the winner. That's not the case. You can make a lot of money based on what we call big money bets, and these are our favorite prop bets of the week, usually top 5s or top 10s, that we think could enlist you a lot of money. So as I look at my favorite big money bets this week, Cole, I'm looking at some of those values. I'm looking at Eric Jones to finish in the top 10 at plus 250. I mean, considering some of the things you said, that seems like a pretty solid value for him to be in the top 10. I'm not going to enlist as much confidence in that one as some of the other ones I will name, such as another one of our values, Ty Gibbs to finish in the top 10. That is at plus 120. So you can just more than double your money for Ty Gibbs to finish in the top 10, something he's done plenty of times this year and at one of his best tracks on the circuit. Then I'm looking at some top 5 bets. I like Joey Logano at plus 200 to be in the top 5. He has finished in the top 5, 2 of his last 3 races, and you come to a track that the Fords, and specifically he is comfortable at in Michigan. I like Logano this week, plus 200 to be in the top 5. That's one of my favorite big money bets of the week, as is Kevin Harvick to be in the top 5. That's at plus 120. A big fan of Harvick's in general this week for the reasons that you mentioned earlier, Cole. He's got easily the best numbers at this track, even considering how much he has raced here. It has not dwindled down his average finish or anything of that sort at all. Plus 120 to be in the top 5 with all he has done recently seems like a pretty good lock to me.
Well, I'm going to keep this really short because those were actually my 4 big money bets also. So I'll just roll through them again. Kevin Harvick, top 5, plus 120. We got Joey Logano, top 5, plus 200. Ty Gibbs, top 10, plus 120. And Eric Jones as a more of a high-risk top 10 big money bet at plus 250. I love all those. I think the fact that both of us have the confidence in all 4 of those props does speak volumes, and I think that those are all worth looking at. But if you're going to place one of those bets this week and a large sum, I think the definition of a big money bet's got to be the Kevin Harvick top 5 at plus 120. I would throw at least $20 on that to double your money, a little more than double your money, but that should be a lock in my opinion. Seeing as he finished top 2 13 times in his career here, that's not even including 3rd through 5th place finishes. So I just love all those values, but especially Kevin Harvick to finish top 5 plus 120.
I'll drop one more in there too, and the fact that we're both on the same page about those should speak volumes about our confidence in those being big money bets. Best manufacturer to finish in this race between Chevy, Toyota, and Ford. They are plus 160, plus 170, and plus 190 respectively. And I think it's funny because out of the Chevys, it's pretty clear if one wins, which ones it'll be. Same with the Toyotas. Like, it's going to be either the Hendricks or the Gibbs cars. But the Fords, who are the least favored to win out of those 3 manufacturers, plus 190, I kind of like the strength in numbers. I just think they're so good at Michigan that there's no reason why the Fords can't be the winning manufacturer, plus 190. That might be a big money bet for me. I don't know if I'm ready to full-heartedly call it one, only because of how much confidence I do have in some of the Gibbs and Hendrick drivers that we talked about. But that's one that's on my radar, plus 190 for the Fords to win. But those are our big money bets. Feel pretty good about those. So we'll talk more about that next week when we see how those end up faring for us. But let's talk about our DFS lineup here now, our daily fantasy recommendation. This is a lineup that consists of 6 drivers that we have talked about during this episode. There are 6 of the 12 drivers that we just discussed. So let's dig into it. It's going to lead off with our favorite value from the favorites category. That was Kevin Harvick, 10,300. Talking about all those favorites, Harvick was our favorite value of them. And based on what we were able to do with some of the other drivers in our budget, it made all the sense in the world to lead this lineup off with Kevin Harvick. And then Joey Logano, 9,300, was our second most expensive driver. Again, another guy we're both very high on this week. 8,600, Brad Keselowski, a good value as our third most expensive driver, with Ty Gibbs at 8,100, our fourth most expensive driver. And we rounded out the lineup with 2 of our favorite values of the week, Eric Jones at 7,300 and Michael McDowell at 6,200. So anytime we've got a DFS lineup recommendation that includes all drivers we've discussed on this episode, I feel really good about it. I think you could probably say the same. I think we just did a nice job with this lineup, maximizing the values from each tier. Like, we picked our favorite value out of the favorites. We picked our favorite value out of the sleepers, Brad, and then obviously Kevin Harvick, and then we still had enough of a cushion to pick some of those other good drivers like Logano and Gibbs. So I feel pretty good about this one. Again, we've seen a lot of the mile-and-a-half tracks go as expected kind of this year in terms of the drivers we've seen compete well at them over this next-gen era, and I think we can feel pretty good about what we've seen and what we've discussed here going into this race at Michigan.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this lineup, actually. I think there's a lot of logic that went into it. So I mentioned earlier in the show how people don't tend to lead a lot of laps here. Case in point, most laps led last year was 38 between 2 drivers. So I think having the 2 top drivers in laps led at Michigan and Kevin Harvick and Joey Logano was a smart play, and coupling that with the fact that those 2 drivers, in addition to Brad Keselowski, have been three of the best forwards as of late, and they've really, really been taking that next step up, I would say, in terms of the competitiveness in this season. Then you got, again, I guess, along with Brad Keselowski, another hometown guy in Eric Jones, who's also been really, really solid the past month or so, along with Michael McDowell, who's a great value and still fighting for that final playoff spot, plus 18 above the cutoff, looking for a consistent day. And obviously, Ty Gibbs is as consistent and reliable as you can get for a value pick. $8,100. It's right below that average remaining player salary. So that's like a no-brainer in my opinion if you could squeeze him in there, which I think you probably could and you probably should. Because, again, along with the laps led thing and picking your ace in the hole, Michigan's a tough place again because you don't see those long, dominant runs. It's all few mileage. So you're kind of putting your hands into what you believe in, who's going to win this race. And I just think that the guys like Truex, Hamlin, and Larson are too much of a value for DFS. And you can probably get the same thing with Ty Gibbs. So why not just sacrifice that money and go for him? And even like we both did a lineup. I had Chase Elliott over Joey Logano. You could do the same thing in swapping him for Kyle Larson. So overall, I think we did a really good job. I think it's composed very well rounded, and I think it should win a lot of people a lot of money this week.
I just want to say, I think if you're doing NASCAR betting right, you got your hands in a little bit of everything. You've got your winner picks. There might be 3 or 4. You've got your big money bets, your prop bets going into the week, and you've got your daily fantasy lineup. So take what we've said for what it's worth and maybe just manipulate it into the best version of what your opinion is. Again, some weeks our picks are right on the money. If you went with exactly what we said, you're going to bank out. But there's other weeks where we might have went with Joey Logano in our lineup, but you might go with Chase Elliott instead based on preference, and that could be a big money-paying move for you. And I implore you to do that. Again, I think we can both agree that that's why we discussed 12 drivers here, because we dwindled it down to 6, but if you happen to like our argument for one of those drivers better than the one that we ended up deciding to go with, stick with your gut. That's so important in betting and especially in NASCAR, and that's something that I think is important to just hammer home here as we get to the end of this episode. As we get to the end of the episode, Cole, it's time to give our winner picks for the week, and this is where we might go out on a limb and even name a driver that we haven't discussed a lot this week. And as I am picking first this week, I'll say I picked Truex last week. He had a solid competitive day, but was not the race-winning car, of course. It was first-time winner, Chris Buescher. Like I had mentioned, was kind of the instinct I had, but didn't really know exactly where to go past that point. But I'm going to go today, Cole, with a driver that we haven't discussed at all, and that is William Byron. I just think about what we've seen this year at intermediate tracks and the fact that the 24 car, for the good bulk of this year, that team has been the team to beat at 1.5 mile, 2 mile speedways, such as Michigan. You think about the win at Vegas from earlier this year, which is a pretty similar track in some regards. Again, I'm cautiously optimistic about it. We've discussed Larson. We've discussed Chase Elliott. We've not discussed William Byron, who actually is also top 5 in the odds per bet MGM. I think that they're going to come out and win a race when people least expect it. Like, the results recently haven't been what they've been accustomed to. They had a 7-race top 10 streak that went from Talladega through Gateway, and since that point, only a couple of top 10s for Byron, but we're starting to get to some more tracks in his wheelhouse, such as this one. I just think that the 24 team and Rudy Fugle has had such a knack for getting the package down at these tracks. And I'm trying to justify William Byron, being that we haven't talked about him a lot this week. However, I just think about the driver and the team that's been the cream of the crop at these intermediate tracks. I'm looking at William Byron. I think he's going to win the race.
Very nice. For me, you left a lot of really good options out there. There's Denny Hamlin, Truex, Larson, all those favorites. I'm going to go with another first-time winner this season, and I'm going to say that RFK does 2 in a row, and I'm going to go with Brad Keselowski. I just like where this team is at a lot. I love where the driver is at as well. I think you look at last week, that was Brad's race to lose, and he lost it. It came down to the money stop, and he overshot his pit box, got the thing turned in a little bit sideways, and that ended up giving him a 6th place finish, and which you saw his other driver go to victory lane. So I think he is motivated more than ever, not only to get to victory lane, but if he were to do it at his home track for the first time and in his second season as a team owner, that would just be incredible. I think it would do a lot of great things for him and his season and whatnot. So I like rolling dice with Brad Keselowski for my race winner this week. And for my my sleeper, I'm going to go with another Michigan boy, and Eric Jones. By the way, that's going to be Ty Gibbs and down in the odds, 15th and lower per BetMGM. I just like where this team's at as well. I think there's a good air surrounding Legacy MC, obviously, given Jimmy's recent induction into the Hall of Fame for the 2024 class. I think that team's just been competing very well. They've been running top 15, challenging for top 10s. And anytime you go to your home track, there's a little bit extra motivation to go out there and get the deal done. So I like both the Michigan boys, and Brad Keselowski and Eric Jones.
I do too. And there was a point where we were kind of afraid to pick the Legacy MC cars earlier this year because they didn't unload good. You know, it's a new team, a new merged team that really wasn't putting forth the best results, but we've started to see them overcome a slow start. And specifically that 42 team, or that 43 team, and Eric Jones has looked really good and sporty over recent weeks. And I like your logic there in going with a couple of Michigan guys. And it would make a lot of sense if one of them was to come away with a win and lock themselves officially into the playoffs. In Brad's case, he's really solid on points, but it just seems like that team's peaking at a really good time too. For my sleeper, I'm going to go with Ty Gibbs. I just think that, again, a guy that he is the 15th best driver in odds. We discussed it a lot earlier, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but he's been so good at this track, and there's no reason why he can't go out there and potentially, as you talk about first-time winners, I wouldn't be surprised to see Ty Gibbs running out there and potentially giving everyone a run for their money. He's a guy that, we haven't discussed a lot in terms of the playoff bubble, but he's right on the bubble too, in the sense that that team's going to probably need a win if they want to get in the playoffs, barring some drivers in front of them running into trouble and them being able to capitalize off it. So I think that that's certainly in their mind. He has such a way of seeming so controlled in the car for a rookie, which is hard to believe. But I think that we've seen the other side of Ty Gibbs. We know he's going to do what it takes to win a race when he's in position, and there's no reason why that can't be this week. So a lot to discuss there. I pick William Byron and Ty Gibbs. You got Brad Keselowski and Eric Jones, the two Michigan boys. So this will be a fun one. Michigan has become a really fun track on this circuit. It's the Firekeepers Casino 400, which will have 200 laps, 400 miles of racing. Green flag at 2:30 on Sunday, August 6th at Michigan. So it should be another fun one here as we drop the jack on the money stop, your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We hope you take what we have given you and turn it into some money. Take what we have said and do your best version of it. But for Cole, I'm Steven, and for all of us on behalf of Kickin the Tires and SharpLink Gaming, thank you all so much for tuning in to this week's episode of The Money Stop. Hope you make some money, and we'll see you next week.